Ever feel like the world's one big tug-of-war? Everyone pulling in different directions.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, get ready, because today we're diving deep into social conflict.
Yeah, that's right.
What causes it? What forms does it take? And most importantly, how can we resolve it?
Big questions.
Our guide for this deep dive is a university-level sociology text. So think of it as a crash course in conflict resolution, straight from the experts.
Exactly. We'll be uncovering the hidden dynamics at play from those power struggles
Oh, I know those all too well.
to the art of compromise.
Ah, compromise. Easier said than done, right?
Sometimes, yeah. But by the end of this deep dive, you'll have a whole new perspective on how conflict shapes our lives. And hey, maybe even some tools for navigating those tricky situations yourself.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The text starts by defining social conflict. It's basically two or more actors opposing each other
Classic standoff.
as they try to reach goals that are either scarce or just incompatible.
Right, so you've got that limited pie, or everyone wants different slices.
Sounds pretty straightforward.
It does on the surface, but the intrigue lies in the power dynamics.
Ooh, power dynamics. Always makes things interesting.
It really does. It's like a game of chess. Who holds the power? And who's trying to seize it?
Okay, I'm liking the chess analogy.
Good. So let's take a real-world example. The Gurjar movement in Rajasthan.
Okay, I'm listening.
The Gurjars, they wanted tribal status and the benefits that come with it. Things like reserved seats in government jobs and educational institutions.
Makes sense. Those are valuable benefits.
Absolutely. But the Meena tribe, they already held significant political and economic power in the region.
Uh-oh. Sounds like a clash brewing.
You got it. And the Meenas essentially block the Gurjars' path.
So it wasn't just about both sides wanting the same thing.
Right. It went deeper than that. One group's gain would have been another's loss.
I see. The classic zero-sum game.
Exactly. And sometimes those conflicts, they're baked right into the structure of society.
Wow, okay, that's getting a bit heavy.
Yeah, think about the historical example of the Harijan community in India.
Okay, I'm familiar with that term, but remind me, what does it refer to?
So Harijan was a term used by Mahatma Gandhi to refer to the Dalit community, formerly known as untouchables.
Right, that's right.
And they faced generations of mistreatment, real deep-seated prejudice from those considered upper caste. It illustrates how these power imbalances can fuel conflict for centuries.
A tragic example for sure.
It is, and it took figures like Gandhi who championed self-respect for the Harijan community and helped shift that power dynamic to push for change.
So it shows how deeply ingrained these conflicts can be.
Absolutely.
Now, when we think of conflict, we often picture shouting matches.
Right. Big arguments, maybe even some table pounding.
Totally. But it's not always that obvious, is it?
It's not. And that's what's so interesting. The text breaks down conflict into three distinct forms.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
The first type, overt conflict. That's the one you're probably picturing.
The shouting and the table pounding.
Exactly. It's open, it's explicit. It's like a labor union negotiation, a public debate where everyone's laying their cards on the table.
Makes sense. So what's next?
All right, so the second type is objective conflict.
Objective conflict, huh?
This is where it gets interesting. Objective conflict happens when one group gains an advantage, maybe even unintentionally, at the expense of another.
Like a ripple effect.
Perfect analogy. Remember that reservation example we talked about with the Gurjars and the Meenas?
Yeah, I'm following you.
Well, even within that broader OBC category, certain dominant castes, like the Jats and the Arhirs, they benefited more than others.
So it created a new layer of conflict.
Exactly. It's part of what sparked the Gurjars' demand for a separate quota.
So even policies designed with good intentions.
Can inadvertently create conflict? You got it.
That's wild. It's like those domino effects. One seemingly small change and everything topples over.
Exactly. You can't always predict those unintended consequences.
Okay, so we've got the in-your-face conflict and then the ripple effect conflict. What's the third kind?
This one's a bit more internal. Subjective conflict.
Subjective conflict. So is this like all in your head?
In a way, yes. It's about how an individual experiences struggle, even if it's not some big public display.
Okay, I think we've all felt that.
Right. Like hitting your head against a brick wall, even if no one else can see it.
Totally. Been there, done that. But I'm already feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this conflict talk. Let's shift gears a bit.
You got it. Time for solutions.
Yes, please. Give us some hope.
Don't worry, the text has got us covered. There are more options than you might think.
Okay, I'm ready.
One powerful approach is finding mutually beneficial goals.
Mutually beneficial goals. So we're not talking about one side winning and the other losing.
Not at all. It's about shifting that mindset, moving away from me versus you and towards us working together.
Okay, I like that. More we, less me versus you.
Exactly. And there's this fascinating study by Muzaffer and Carolyn Sharif, these social psychologists. They actually created a rivalry between two groups of boys at a summer camp.
Wait, they deliberately created conflict.
They did. It involved things like raids and sabotage. The boys were really getting into it.
Wow. Sounds intense, but also a little mean.
Well, it was all in the name of science. But then they threw a curveball.
Ooh, I love a good curveball. What do they do?
They introduced a problem that both groups had to solve together.
Uh-huh. Force them to cooperate.
Exactly. And guess what? It totally changed the dynamic. The boys had to see each other as allies, not enemies.
So they had a common enemy, and it brought them together. I've heard of that happening in real life, too.
Right. It's proof that finding common ground, it can be a total game changer.
So it's about finding that win-win, where everyone feels like they're succeeding together.
You got it.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another essential ingredient in conflict resolution.
Hit me with it.
Compromise.
Compromise. The art of meeting in the middle.
It's a little more nuanced than that. True compromise is about understanding both sides' core needs. What do they really need to walk away feeling okay?
Okay, so really digging beneath the surface.
Exactly. And then finding a solution that addresses those needs, even if it means no one gets everything they initially wanted.
Right. It's about prioritizing. What are the non-negotiables?
Exactly. And sometimes the best way to handle conflict is to stop it from happening in the first place.
Oh, I like the sound of that. How do we do that?
By establishing clear norms or rules of engagement.
So, like setting boundaries.
You got it. It's like having a referee at a sports game. Everyone knows the rules going in.
Right. Less room for arguments.
Exactly. So if you know things could get heated, set those ground rules beforehand. That way everyone knows what to expect.
Makes total sense. But I imagine that only works if both sides are willing to play by the rules right.
Absolutely. You need that mutual respect and a willingness to listen to each other.
Okay, so we've got finding common goals, compromise, and setting ground rules. What else is in our conflict resolution toolbox?
Well, there's one more tool I want to mention. Pro-social behavior.
Pro-social behavior. So like being a good person.
That's a great way to put it. It's basically any action intended to help others, to benefit society, to be kind, to volunteer.
Okay, I can get behind that.
And what's fascinating is research shows that when people engage in pro-social behavior towards a group they're in conflict with,
It can actually help.
it can. It reduces those feelings of animosity. It helps people see the other side in a new light.
That's so cool. So even small acts of kindness can help resolve conflicts.
They absolutely can. It's about human connection, building bridges.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got some practical strategies, but what about the science of conflict resolution?
Ah, yes. Now we're getting to the good stuff. Social psychologists have developed some fascinating scientific approaches to understanding conflict.
Okay, I'm ready for those secret weapons.
Well, one approach is called the win-lose model.
Win-lose. Pretty self-explanatory, right?
It is. One side comes out on top, the other, well, not so much.
So like a classic battle where there has to be a victor.
Exactly. And the tactics people use in this model, they can range from perfectly acceptable, like voting, to more aggressive approaches.
Oh, like what?
Things like threats, intimidation, sometimes even illegal activities.
Wow, okay. So that sounds a bit risky.
It can be. While the win-lose approach might be effective in certain situations, it can also create a lot of resentment.
Right. It could damage relationships, make things worse in the long run.
You got it. Definitely a high-stakes game. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we've got the lose-lose approach.
Lose-lose. So everyone loses. What's the point of that?
Well, it's all about damage control. Think of it less about achieving goals and more about just minimizing losses.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine you just want to stop the bleeding, so to speak, even if it means no one gets exactly what they want.
So like a truce, just to call a timeout on the conflict.
You got it. It can be useful for de-escalating a situation quickly.
Right, just pressing pause. But doesn't that mean the root of the problem is still there?
It might. That's the downside. It often leads to these unsatisfying outcomes where the core issues remain unresolved.
Right, so it's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches.
Perfect analogy.
Okay, so we've got win-lose, where one side wins and the other loses, and lose-lose, where everyone kind of loses. There has to be a way to actually resolve things where everyone benefits.
Right. There is. And that's where the win-win approach comes in.
Okay, now we're talking.
It's the ideal scenario. Both sides walk away feeling like, hey, my needs were met.
Sounds too good to be true.
Well, it does take work. This approach relies on open communication, empathy, creative problem solving. It's about seeing conflict as an opportunity to collaborate.
So instead of butting heads, you're putting your heads together.
Exactly. Finding solutions that work for everyone involved.
That sounds amazing, but probably a lot harder to pull off in real life.
It definitely requires effort and some strong interpersonal skills. But the payoff can be huge.
I can imagine.
Think about a time when you successfully resolved a conflict with someone. Maybe you both felt heard, you worked together, you came up with a solution that made you both happy. You might have been using the win-win approach without even realizing it.
That's a great point. I bet a lot of us have stumbled onto those win-win solutions without knowing the fancy name for it.
Exactly. It's more common than we think.
Makes you wonder if we're all conflict resolution experts in disguise.
Perhaps we are. Now, the sociology text we're diving into also mentions some other interesting strategies and models.
Okay, like what? Give me more tools for my conflict resolution toolbox.
Well, there's one called Blake and Mouton's 5 conflict resolution strategies.
5 strategies. Okay, that's a lot to keep track of. Is there an acronym or something?
Not an official one, but we can try to come up with something.
Challenge accepted.
All right, so the 5 strategies are withdrawing, smoothing, compromising, forcing, and confrontation with problem solving.
5 strategies. Withdrawing smoothly, compromises, forceful confrontations. How's that?
I like it. A little dramatic, but it might help you remember them.
Withdrawing smoothly, compromises, forceful confrontations. It's got a nice ring to it. Okay, break those down for me. What does each one look like in action?
All right. Withdrawing is pretty self-explanatory. It's about stepping back from the conflict.
Like hitting the pause button.
Exactly. Sometimes disengaging is the best option, at least temporarily.
Right. Sometimes you just got to walk away and regroup.
Exactly. Then we have smoothing, which is all about emphasizing common ground and downplaying differences.
So focusing on what unites you, not what divides you.
You got it.
I see how that could be helpful in de-escalating things, but are you just sweeping problems under the rug?
You could be. That's the potential downside. It's like putting a fresh coat of paint on a house with cracks in the foundation. Might look good on the surface, but
those underlying issues are still there. Got it. Okay, what's next?
Next up is compromising.
Compromise. We talked about that earlier, right? Meeting in the middle.
Right, but it's not always about a 50-50 split. It's about each side making concessions to reach a workable solution.
Okay, so being willing to give a little to get a little.
Exactly.
What about forcing? That sounds a bit aggressive.
It can be. This is a classic win-lose strategy. You push for your own goals, even if it means stepping on a few toes along the way.
So it's the my way or the highway approach.
You got it.
And I'm guessing that doesn't usually end well.
It can be effective in certain situations, like emergencies, but often it just creates more conflict in the long run.
Right, it damages relationships. Not good. Okay, so we've got withdrawing, smoothing, compromising, forcing. What was that last one?
Confrontation with problem solving.
Now that one sounds promising.
Yeah.
Like you're tackling the issue head on.
Exactly. This one aligns with that win-win approach we talked about. Open and honest communication where everyone feels heard and respected.
Okay, so you're not shying away from the conflict. You're actually leaning into it, but in a constructive way.
Exactly. It's about working together to find a solution that truly benefits everyone.
So turning the conflict into a brainstorming session. I like it.
It's a great way to think about it.
Okay, so we've got Blake and Mouton's 5 strategies. What was that other model you mentioned? The 2-dimensional one.
Right, the 2-dimensional model. This one adds another layer of complexity.
Bring on the complexity. I'm ready for it.
It breaks down conflict handling behavior into 2 dimensions. Assertiveness, meaning how much you stand up for your own needs, and cooperativeness, how much you try to meet the needs of others.
Okay, so 2 scales. Got it.
Based on where you fall on those 2 scales, you get 5 different modes for responding to conflict.
Okay, lay them on me. What are the 5 modes?
We've got competing, accommodating, avoiding, collaborating, and compromising.
Right, so some familiar terms in there. Break them down.
Okay, so competing, that's all about being assertive and going after your goals, even if it means, being a bit forceful.
So high on assertiveness, low on cooperation.
Exactly. Think of it like a sports competition where there can only be one winner.
Okay, I get it. Now what about accommodating?
Accommodating is the opposite. You put the other person's needs before your own. You're being the peacemaker, even if it means sacrificing some of your own desires.
So high on cooperation, but maybe not so much on assertiveness.
Exactly. Then there's avoiding, which is basically hitting the snooze button on the conflict.
Ah, yes, the avoidance strategy. We all know that one.
Yeah,
Just hoping the problem magically goes away.
it's tempting, for sure, but rarely a sustainable solution.
Okay, so we've covered competing, accommodating, and avoiding. What were those last two?
Collaborating and compromising.
Uh-huh. Some familiar faces.
Right, so collaborating, that's the ideal mode.
I was hoping you'd say that.
You're both assertive and cooperative. You're advocating for your own needs, but you're also respecting the other person's perspective.
So it's that win-win approach again.
Exactly. Working together to find a solution that truly benefits everyone involved.
I love it. What about compromising?
Compromising is about finding that middle ground. You're willing to give a little to get a little.
So a bit of give and take.
You got it. And what's cool about this model is it acknowledges that we don't always use just one mode.
Right, we're not robots.
Exactly. We might be more assertive in some situations, more accommodating in others.
It depends on our personality and the situation, right?
Exactly. Now, this sociology text we're exploring, it also takes a closer look at group conflict in Indian society.
Okay, so we're getting into the real-world application of all these concepts.
We are. It highlights these different types of conflict that are especially prominent in India. Tribal problems, caste conflict, communal problems, and even things like labor management conflicts.
So you're seeing how all these theories play out in a specific cultural context.
Exactly. And it's fascinating because these conflicts are deeply rooted in India's complex history and social structure.
Yeah, they've got layers. So let's unpack some of these specific types of conflict. Let's start with those tribal problems. What are the key issues at play there?
Well, tribal groups in India, they often face this tension between preserving their unique cultural identity and integrating into the larger society.
So it's about balancing tradition and modernity.
Exactly. They want to maintain their way of life, but they also want access to the same opportunities and resources as everyone else.
It's like they're being asked to choose between who they are and what they need to thrive.
That's a great way to put it. And that tension, it can lead to conflict.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Are there any specific examples that come to mind?
Absolutely. The formation of the state of Tarkhand. It was carved out of the state of Bihar in 2000.
Okay, I vaguely remember hearing about that. Wasn't that driven by the tribal communities in that region?
It was. They felt marginalized, underrepresented. They wanted more control over their own destiny.
So the creation of Harkon, that was a big win for them.
It was, but it also highlights those ongoing tensions between tribal communities and the larger Indian society.
Right, so progress was made, but those underlying conflicts don't just disappear overnight.
You got it.
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about caste conflict, which has sadly been a part of Indian society for centuries.
It has. And it's all about power, right? The caste system, it creates these inherent imbalances that often lead to discrimination and inequality.
We talked about the mistreatment of the Harijan community earlier. Are there other examples of how caste divisions continue to fuel conflict today?
Definitely. The Gujar movement, that's a perfect example. Their demand for a separate quota, it was rooted in the belief that they were being denied opportunities. And that denial, it stemmed from their caste.
It's a reminder that even though the caste system was officially abolished, its legacy still impacts people's lives.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've covered tribal problems, caste conflict. What about communal problems? Those conflicts between different religious groups.
Those can be some of the most volatile and challenging conflicts to address. And India, with its diverse religious landscape, has experienced its fair share.
Right.
One of the most tragic and well-known examples is the demolition of the Babri Masjid.
The Babri Masjid. That was in Ayodhya in 1992, right?
Yes.
A truly devastating event that really shook India and the world.
It did. The destruction of the mosque, which many Hindus believe was built on the birthplace of Lord Ram, sparked riots. Violence between Hindus and Muslims, it left a deep scar on the nation.
It's hard to believe something like that could happen.
It's a reminder of how quickly religious tensions can escalate into violence.
Absolutely.
And it highlights the importance of understanding the historical context. The demolition of the Babri Masjid, it wasn't just about a building, it was about deeply held beliefs and a sense of historical grievance.
Right. So much history. So much pain.
Exactly. It's like that iceberg analogy. What we see on the surface is just the tip of a much larger issue.
And resolving these conflicts, it takes more than just addressing the immediate symptoms.
It does. It requires digging deeper, understanding the root causes. It requires fostering dialogue and empathy between communities.
That sounds like a daunting task.
It can be, but it's also incredibly important work. It's about creating a society where everyone feels respected, regardless of their beliefs.
Well said. Now we've covered those big three: tribal problems, caste conflict, and religious tensions. The text also mentions other types of social conflict, like those between labor and management, or even conflicts arising from language barriers.
Right. We could spend hours delving into each one, but I think we've laid a good foundation for understanding group conflict in India.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive. From the basic definition of social conflict to these real-world examples, it's been eye-opening to see how conflict touches so many aspects of our lives. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that conflict, it's rarely black and white.
Right.
There's so much nuance, so many layers.
Absolutely. We've seen how history, power dynamics, individual perceptions, they all play a role.
It's a lot to untangle.
It is like trying to untie a giant knot.
So if we can't just make conflict disappear, what can we do? How can we actually use these insights?
Well, I think it starts with shifting our perspective. Instead of seeing conflict as this big, scary thing to avoid.
Right, like it's a monster under the bed.
Exactly. What if we embraced it as a natural part of life, part of being human?
Okay, so not eliminating conflict, but managing it.
Exactly. And the more we understand about those different forms of conflict, the better equipped we are to deal with them.
Right, so knowing what we're up against. Is it a clash of interests? A power struggle?
Exactly. Once we understand the nature of the conflict, then we can start thinking about solutions.
It's about having the right tools, right?
It is, like that toolbox you talked about earlier.
But instead of hammers and wrenches, we've got compromise and collaboration and all those other approaches.
I love that. And no matter what approach you choose, communication is key.
Oh, communication is always key. I hear that all the time. But what does it actually look like in a conflict situation?
It's about really listening, not just waiting for your turn to talk, but
Right.
trying to understand the other person's perspective.
Even if you don't agree with them.
Exactly. Being willing to see things from their point of view, that empathy can go a long way.
It's about remembering that we're all human, right? We all have needs and desires, and sometimes those needs clash.
They do. It doesn't mean we have to resort to those win-lose battles all the time.
So true. Think about a time when you successfully resolved a conflict. How did you do it?
Chances are you were using those win-win techniques, maybe without even realizing it.
Maybe we're all conflict resolution experts in disguise.
I think we have that potential. And remember, if you're ever struggling to resolve a conflict on your own, there's help out there.
Oh, good point.
Mediators, counselors, they can offer guidance and support. Think of them as conflict resolution coaches.
So it's not about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about being open to learning.
Exactly. Conflict resolution is a skill. And like any skill, it takes practice. The more we learn about these strategies, the more we put them into practice, the better we'll become at navigating conflict.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into social conflict, we want to leave you with something to think about. What conflict are you facing right now? And which of these approaches might help you find a solution that works for everyone involved?
And if you want to explore these ideas further, definitely check out the source material we use for this deep dive. There's a ton of great info out there.
Until next time, happy resolving.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support helps us keep creating valuable content like this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Join our community for more insights into psychology and personal development. Let's grow and learn together. See you in the next video.